Hey, Matt. 13 people here now.
That's a great first slide. It's also kind of a paradox.
Like they all are, right?
Yeah. This page is actually left blank, but by putting it, it's not blank.
This page intentionally says this.
Yeah.
This page intentionally has no useful information.
There you go. But then that's also a paradox because you wouldn't write it if it wasn't useful. It's useful to know that it was intentionally left without other information.
That's actually very true. All right. Okay, guys, I'm just going to kick it off. Looks like everyone's here, hopefully. And yeah, I do have a call I have an interview right at the end of this, so I will end promptly. And we'll see how long the slides take, but I could see this going short-ish. I imagine there'll be some cool. I'm definitely keen to hear your guys' thoughts because it's definitely going to be like related to stuff that we're doing. Yeah, so I'll just go ahead and kick off. Cool. People can see that slide change. I can't see the video, so I can't tell if anyone's acknowledging me. Yeah, okay. Very good. Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about the economics and psychology of community building. I'm going to talk a lot about motivation. And then I'm going to kind of come around to KPI options and how I think that fits in to this and to some of these topics. Okay, so first, just a definition of extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation is doing something because it leads to a separable outcome. So specifically, that means doing something because the outcome is more or less unrelated to the action, or at least what you're getting from it. And so an easy way to identify that would you be just as happy to receive that separable outcome without the action? And if you would, it's probably an extrinsic motivation. The most obvious example of an extrinsic motivator is money, when in many cases people would be happy to accept the money without the task required to get the money. Intrinsic motivation is doing something because it is inherently interesting or enjoyable. So this means doing something literally just for the joy of it. An example that I like to think of for this is washing dishes. I personally don't hate washing dishes. I find it tactily interesting or pleasant at least, and I enjoy the experience of a job well done. But I would not say that I ever make dishes dirty on purpose just for the joy of washing them. I think that, and so that's like how you could identify a pure intrinsically motivated task is something that you're doing just for the joy of it. That would be purely on that end. I think as we carry on, you'll see that most tasks it's probably difficult to make one purely extrinsic or intrinsic, and it's actually like a matter of debate. And we'll talk about that a bit in the future, the very near future. Okay. Commonality, a sense of shared community, is eroded by the marketization of everything. So that is a quote that I will touch on and explain in just a moment. So I'm going to explore the intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation dilemma. If you pay a kid to play a fun game and then you stop paying them, they will play it less. So there have been a number of studies in social science in social psychology and in behavioral economics around this phenomenon. Basically, if you were to pay somebody to do something that they find intrinsically rewarding, you can actually reduce the likelihood that they'll keep doing it in the future once that extrinsic reward disappears. And so they've done this in a few different approaches. One is by paying kids to read does result in them reading, but it doesn't result in them loving to read. And so what you're doing is you're paying kids to do something they probably wouldn't do otherwise, potentially. I mean, like unless there happened to be a kid that likes reading a lot. But the problem is it doesn't necessarily result in a long-term habit or trend. In the same way, you could actually take something kids like doing just for the joy of it, such as playing a fun game. But when you start paying them to do it, it changes something in their brain and they stop liking it as much, or they come to expect the reward, or something happens where they no longer will play the game just for fun, or they'll play it, less. So paying kids to read does result in them reading, and initially results in them reading more. It does not result in them loving to read. So let's talk about UMA a little bit. Paying people to build stuff on UMA does result in them building stuff. And so if you think about earlier on in our community, when we started to do a certain number of bounties, or we have developers or just community people that put together assets and resources for us, in many cases those were paid tasks. And so the thing that we want to understand is, does paying people to build stuff on UMA like result in them loving UMA or loving building stuff on UMA, for example? And I think that that's like an important question. um, and so like, yeah, it's true that if you pay people to build stuff, they will build stuff. If you pay people to build stuff on UMA, they learn UMA. And so the reason that that's important to understand is that they need to basically understand UMA at some point in this, right? And sort of similar to the teaching kids to read piece of this, if kids don't really know how to read or they find it very difficult, they might not read for that reason. So paying them to read can kind of get them over that initial motivation hump. But it's this double-edged sword where you get them over that hump, use these extrinsic rewards to get them over the hump, but you don't necessarily want that to be the only reason they're reading either. So in the same way, we sort of pay people initially to get over that learning curve at UMA, but we do want them to love UMA, right? We don't want them to show up for a paycheck. We want them to love UMA and to love their ownership in UMA. So rewards to that point are neither good nor bad. There's just good and bad uses of them. So a really important question to ask yourself whenever you're thinking about motivations and rewards is intrinsic motivation relevant? Some things are boring. So some things you don't necessarily try to focus on the intrinsic reward of it, right? I think if you're paying a kid to take out the garbage, you're not doing it to build their love of like domestic chores necessarily. I do find a certain joy in like taking care of domestic things like from time to time. But aside from that, that's like my joy of being an adult, right? Generally, intrinsic motivation is not relevant for a task like that. On the other hand, there are certain things where the reward is unnecessary or superfluous. And so if you're paying a kid to play a fun game, or you're paying somebody to do something they might enjoy doing otherwise, like just for example, imagine someone's being nice in our community and you start paying them. You're like, oh, you were so nice, here's some money. Like that would seem very strange, right? Um, some things are fun right away. But, and this goes back to that slide previous, sometimes rewards get you motivated to be competent, which can be a prerequisite for fun. So you have this scenario where, and I think we saw this in UMA's community, where people didn't really know how to build stuff or what to do yet. And so sometimes you need some rewards to get people over that kind of competence hump. So to that point, something that was dull and challenging when you're skilled can become fun. Another interesting piece of this, and this is something that happens in a community, is even if it isn't fun, it becomes this thing that you're uniquely capable of helping others to do. And people find contribution to be rewarding. And so I think like, well, I don't want to assume another task isn't fun for another person, but like, yeah, I don't want to. But like, for example, I think that we had trouble at times motivating people to be excited about like UMIP reviews and UMIP structuring, right? For price IDs. And I can tell that certain people like enjoy thinking about these things and that they just enjoy the structure and the rules. So I'm not saying it's not fun, but I am saying that I recognize a bit of people being excited to share their knowledge and expertise, particularly when other people showed up and needed help to get something done. So this brings me to this thing that I famously quoted Adam Smith saying, which is that man actually desires not only to be loved, but to be lovely. Adam Smith being the famous economist, of course. So here's a discussion question for you guys. This is the midway through chat break. If someone in the community is freely helpful, is that because of intrinsic or extrinsic motivation? What do you guys think?
I'm going to say extrinsic motivation because of tokens and the desire to have the tokens be worth more. So if you get more people behind you, the value goes up.
Okay. Any counterpoints or other points?
Yeah, I guess I would have argued intrinsic because kind of you chose, I don't know if you chose carefully to put the word freely in here, but this is kind of someone in the community who saw the word freely and I thought they were just being helpful because they intrinsically find being helpful useful.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it gets complicated in crypto communities specifically. So I remember being a kid and being involved in like a Halo fan site community, and myself and others put a ton of work in moderating the forum. And there's like no way that you're ever going to get paid for that outside of maybe like they'll send you a t-shirt at some point. Where with crypto, it's kind of weird because if you're known to be like really knowledgeable and helpful, that can lead to like a career, even if you're not getting paid directly. So it's kind of complicated once it's intersecting with like a potential career.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it seems like it's a combination of both.
Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts?
I would argue that it's mostly like 80 to 90% intrinsic. Just because like I think if you were like really rational and strategizing on how to like make the most money, you wouldn't be participating in crypto communities. You'd be like, learning the skills that's required to get hired by a crypto company or whatever, right? These communities, like, I think there's like this kind of special sauce in these communities that's like that really wouldn't be there if people were just doing it out of just economic rationality. And I think it's way more economic. Like if you look on the economic rationality scale, it's way more on the economic irrational side than the rational side. So that's why I think it's like highly intrinsic. Even if you can make arguments, around the edges that like, oh, it's kind of extrinsic in these, weird ways. Like the token price goes up if I do a good job or whatever.
Sure. And an interesting, I think these are really great points. And an interesting thing for me as I think about this question is like, we are sort of dividing intrinsic and extrinsic across the board of like wanting other people to be happy or to do something nice versus like financial payout. But I would want to ask the question, like, this feeling like you're a contributing member of society is like a certain type of reward, right? It's certainly not as external as a moneyed payout, and it's definitely not. It's not separable. If we go back to that original definition of extrinsic rewards, it's not separable. It's definitely like content. It's not content agnostic or anything like that. It is somewhat circumstantial or conditional on circumstances, meaning like you do need kind of a healthy community that like to feel honor, and exactly what you were talking about, John, with the Halo community. You have to have a community that like cares about what you're doing and cares about your helpfulness and is generally like benefits from what you're doing. So I would say that they're like good-hearted incentives. I don't know. I don't have a solid, this isn't like a yes or no question either. There's no right answer. It's, I just do find it an interesting thing. I think we'll start to come down to like the discussion of free will if we're not careful, around like whether you do things for pure reasons or not. Yeah. Awesome. That's really good input. Anyone else have any comments before I carry on? Thank you guys. Yeah, John, I really appreciate your comments about it being both things and also being complicated. And that kind of touches on the thesis / conclusion that I have here, which we'll get to in a minute. Okay, so I talked a bit about the intrinsic and extrinsic dilemma. There are alternatives to particular types of payouts. So extrinsic rewards are the type where you, or sorry, not extrinsic rewards, but there is a type of motivation where you say, if you build this, I will give you this many dollars, right? There are other ways to approach rewards and essentially make sure to give people that external extrinsic payout, also like acknowledge their efforts and their skills without quashing their intrinsic reward system. So bonuses, unexpected rewards, and thank yous are great examples of this. This is something that I personally use a lot and prefer it. I like when people sort of show up and create something cool just for the love of it, and then that what they made brings value, and I want to make sure that they got recognized for that. And that, I think, has a different sort of psychological impact than merely paying people for doing a job. They basically get to participate in both reward types, intrinsic and extrinsic, whereby they did the thing for the loveliness of it, but then they got the extrinsic benefit as well. And I think my personal theory is that that leads to the best outcomes in the long run and the best relationships. Another way to just advertising a payout is really what I mean here. Alternatives to advertised pay is delight. And so you can offer time, attention, or surprise prizes, acknowledgement, all of those things. Just keeping things fun, basically, can really help people feel motivated to do cool stuff. Furthermore, and this kind of goes to John's point around the intersection with crypto and these topics, the stance I like to take when I do reward somebody for something is not I'm paying you for doing a task. It's that I'm making sure you own part of the protocol that you've helped to build. I'm not sure that there's like a huge difference, but it feels different to me. I guess basically I want the people to understand that this is a case of us, working together to create this really cool thing, and I want them to feel a sense of ownership. And I guess it kind of goes back to that very first definition of extrinsic reward being separable. I want them to feel like it's not separable, that it's part of the holistic experience, I guess. I think that a community fund should be a conduit for sweat equity in a community. So in that same sort of way, right? Like you're recognizing the cool value that people are bringing, and you're making sure that they own a piece of the thing that they just helped build. So I'm sort of like ripping on extrinsic rewards and talking a bit about why they're problematic, but like I do want to like remind everyone that we're firmly rooted in crypto economics. We are talking about community here. So this is a quote or a law that I've heard on Bankless a few times, but I forget who said it. But basically, where cryptography fails, we use crypto economics. So we want to use cryptography for everything we can. That's the nature of trustless contracts. But crypto economics are what allow us to hold things together when you can't use just cryptography. So obviously, UMA is fundamentally built into crypto economics, and it's the glue that holds us together. Liquidators and keeper bots and voting all require crypto economic incentives. We definitely do not have any theories around people voting correctly for the intrinsic reward of doing so. So just like on one end of the extreme, extrinsic motivators and crypto economic rewards are extremely important. However, somewhere in this middle zone is where community building exists, at the intersection of pure crypto economic incentives and pure-hearted intentions to contribute. So that goes exactly to John's point around this funny hybrid that we see in crypto communities. Several studies have shown that autonomy supportive, in contrast to controlling teachers, catalyze in students greater intrinsic motivation, curiosity, and desire for challenge. So the key word there is autonomy supportive. You want to give people autonomy. It has better outcomes with regard to motivation and long-term relationships. Maybe personal relationships too, but I mean long-term business community relationships. So in the best cases, people are empowered to build cool things. That's important for autonomy, allowing them to build cool things, build them the way they want to build them, present them fairly freely. Something that I think benefits a community a lot is when you give people the tools to build and create stuff basically without your sign off or permission or anything. A somewhat trivial example is I gave the subgroup of superhumans, the agents, the power to create custom emojis. And so they can go in Discord and create, for the whole UMA server, they can create their own emojis in there. We also have people that are creating graphics, NFTs, POAPs, and then also just writing proposals, things like that. So those are examples of empowering people. People also feel that the community appreciates what they did. So of course, they need to have a community there to appreciate it. That is a bit of a chicken and the egg problem when you're starting a new community. Essentially, it's hard to get people to do cool stuff unless someone's going to appreciate it. It's hard to build that appreciative community unless people are building cool stuff. And I will come back to that in a minute, that problem, that dilemma. Community motivations include things like being seen as good or generous, being seen as skillful or smart, and contributing, feeling like you helped someone today. So these are all things that I think we would more strongly identify as intrinsic type of motivations. But kind of regardless, those are the things that sort of flow out of people and their human desire to be loveliness. And then, of course, inclusion, feeling like you're part of something bigger than just yourself. The inclinations to take interest in novelty, to actively assimilate, and to creatively apply our skills is not limited to childhood, but is a significant feature of human nature that affects performance, persistence, and well-being across life's epochs. So I think this is something that everyone on this call can relate to, because I think it's something we like identify with and recognize in ourselves in our professional careers. And it's something that we all sort of enjoy about each other, I think, is the fact that we take interest in novelty and like creatively applying our skills, etc. A good community gives people opportunities to do just these things. So I'm going to kind of do a little review here. Given that people want opportunities to be lovely, this means they can't only do things for financial reasons. If you're doing things for just financial reasons, it's not seen as lovely. It's seen as extrinsically motivated. However, people want extrinsic reward. They need to make a living. This means they can't only do things for intrinsic reasons. So John can't merely be a Halo forum moderator forever and full-time. Maybe nowadays with esports, you can do that sort of thing. I don't know, but your average person maybe can't rely on that. I'm not sure. Okay, so given these four things, keep these things in mind. My thesis on shared incentives are that shared incentives, as with KPI options, create the best of both worlds. Every action that brings you closer to the KPI is celebrated by the community, and it benefits you extrinsically, and you share the payout with others. And so my argument is that shared incentives, such as with the KPI options and what they deliver, is that it helps sort of solve this chicken and the egg problem just by sort of kind of like hot wiring the system a little bit to move it along to basically where you have people who are immediately excited for contributions that you make and who are also excited to make contributions. And so KPI options and shared incentives like this, I think could be very instrumental in bootstrapping a new community, specifically overcoming that chicken and the egg problem. So my thesis here is that shared incentives, such as with KPI options, hack the extrinsic-intrinsic motivation dilemma. That's the thing that I mentioned in the beginning, which is that paying kids to read does not cause them to love to read. I think that paying people KPI options to contribute to a community causes them to get over the hump, to be excited to contribute, and to start contributing and to have all the benefits of extrinsic motivation while also receiving the benefits of intrinsic motivation and the joy and the loveliness associated with those motivations. So I'll talk a bit about the superhumans. This is the final slide. So the superhumans were formed from the UTVL KPI option campaign in UMA. UMA's community is not a new one. And so, yeah, just to demonstrate that they're hardly relevant only for new communities. And what we saw happen is that the UTVL payout fell considerably midway through the program, but the group bond actually held very strong. And so I take this as a sign essentially of what I just described, which is that extrinsic motivation sort of was the initial impetus to get people to kind of form this bond and work together. But sort of despite that payout sort of fall just based on the KPI performance, we didn't see people sort of disappear and fade away. In fact, going back to that economic rationality thing Matt was talking about, people stayed very dedicated to what we're up to. Now, that being said, like there's still an forthcoming extrinsic motivator or financial reward associated with this. And the argument here is hardly to take away the financial reward and keep people motivated without it. It's rather just that both things were working together, and the disappearance of the immediate external reward didn't sort of, or not, maybe not the disappearance, but the sort of reduction of expectation did not result in things falling apart. And so finally, the amount of unprompted helping, leadership, and organization combined with genuine gratitude and cheerleading shows me that people have the drive of the extrinsically motivated and the loveliness of the intrinsically motivated. And that is as a result, I believe, of the KPI option design and campaign and just using shared incentives in general. I think that they are a powerful way to move communities along. My final point will be that somebody mentioned the thing, or Tom, your first response around extrinsic motivation was that helping, if you're a token holder, helping will increase the value. And so I think that that's kind of the premise behind like basically crypto communities since the beginning, right? This idea of like airdropping to people to build this community of interested token holders, et cetera. So I absolutely think that's true. I think KPI options allows you to like basically double it on itself or make an exponent of it, because not only are you paying out sort of based on immediate contributions, you're paying out in that token itself. And so the contributions the community members making earn them more of those tokens and increases the value of the tokens they'll get. And I think it also just makes it psychologically a little bit better, whereby like you have, 3-month payouts versus this like vague long-term market determined kind of payout associated with token price, which can feel a bit, out of control, and also has that problematic effect where people sort of disappear if the price starts to go in the wrong direction. So yeah, that's my presentation on intrinsic motivations and why I think that KPI options are pretty powerful in kind of hacking the dilemma that we see with that. All right, I will stop sharing. Why am I getting, nobody else got a round of applause, but I like it. I'll take it.
Clayton, you should go back to that picture of you sitting regally, looking like a thinker. That's essentially how we should. Yeah, exactly. I like that one. But well done.
Very good. Cool. Well, thank you guys. This was shorter. I mean, I'm glad I didn't try to stretch it out. I think it was the right amount of time to talk about this thing. Definitely keen to hear your thoughts, both on the topic and then just, I don't know, just generally, about our community and maybe ways that we can leverage KPI options and whether you agree with my thesis, basically.
Does the community weigh in on meta community topics like this? Like, do you discuss questions like this with the community, or is that kind of one of those topics that's like they are self-interested people, so they're going to be like, yes, you should always pay money to people in the community? I would imagine they're much more thoughtful than that, but it is kind of a weird thing to discuss, like kind of how you run a community with members of the community.
Totally. Well, I love discussing this with the community just because I really love the like self-referential meta thing of it. I have actually asked this question, and the response I got was really cool. It was basically like, I said like, hey, are you guys sort of hustling because of this payout, or is it because because you're like happy that other people are happy that you're doing it, etc. And the response that I got generally was like, I'm really happy to have something that I feel like is a bigger part of my life and something I can feel proud of, something I can feel good about myself for contributing to. And I thought that was a really cool reply. And I still would sort of categorize that in that intrinsic thing, but people's replies moved very far away from the extrinsic reward. And to put that in my framework here, I would say that that's an example of giving people the opportunity to like basically experience and feel and express those intrinsic motivators as their primary motivators, and then allow the extrinsic rewards to be sort of like something that we know is important but isn't your main focus.
Or they could have just been saying that because they know that's what you want to hear, and then you are the primary extrinsic motivator, so you will give them more extrinsic motivations if they do right by you.
I think it's a big grand manipulation game of me and the thesis, which would be great, and that's the fun of it. I would applaud that all the same. That's funny.
I guess one more question that I have is like, there's a lot of like, I don't know, not theory. I feel like the way all this comes out is that it's a little bit mushy, and there's like you want to do extrinsic motivators sometimes and like intrinsic motivators other times, but the theory here doesn't really tell you how to manage this in practice and how to make these decisions. So like, what's your framework? Because I mean, you make a lot of these decisions all the time about how to motivate people in the community and how to build this community and how to get people involved. What framework do you use to make these decisions on a day-to-day basis? Like, how are you using your gut? You just say, kind of go with what you think on that particular day, or do you have like a process you go through?
Sure. Yeah, it's difficult to have this, to make it sort of a framework. I would say that it is sort of done in the moment. And so for example, and there's also iterative. So I'll sometimes put out a request for people to do something without offering any reward. And occasionally people will take it up. And then I'll be like, okay, this is cool. People are motivated to do this without the reward. And then maybe I'll give them a bonus afterwards, right? Because they should still receive something for what they did. There's other times where people just don't respond, and I have to put an external reward on it. And then there's certain types of tasks, like, for example, just like asking someone to write an UMIP for a price ID. That's like a kind of a tall order. And I found it trouble to just not work terribly well to just ask someone to go write one. So that's one I put a bounty on. So there's like a bit of a trial and error. I always err on the side of, starting out without sort of paying for a job, quote unquote. Another example though, Matt, is like, if somebody, like an example here would be like Ewan, he created this cool spreadsheet where he was listing the APRs of all the different mining opportunities, farming opportunities. And like, I was like, wow, this is awesome. And so I started chatting with him, and I gave him some bonus just for creating it. But then we started to have these requests, and we're like, hey, can you add this? Can you take this away? Can you fix this? Blah, blah, blah. At that point, basically when I'm making very specific requests and I'm taking away their autonomy in a certain way, right? I'm saying this is how this will be better and I'd like to see this happen. Then I have to pay them because I'm removing that autonomy piece of it. And I think it's like basically rude to be demanding these specific changes without, offering them some compensation, because they're not doing it for the joy of it anymore as much, unless it's the joy of making Clayton happy, which that's a nice one too.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like kind of like they no longer are expressing their own creativity in a way.
Yeah.
So when they lose that kind of autonomy and creativity, and you kind of almost have to compensate them for that loss in some ways, right?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah.
How has the... yeah, John.
Oh, I was just going to say one thing that's interesting to me is that the line between extrinsic and intrinsic reward is a little bit fuzzy when you're talking about like esteem from other people around you and like the respect and like feeling like you're smart, because a lot of that is culture. And then how do you go about defining like what are the cultural hooks that we're going to have encourage people to grab onto? Like, are we trying to be like a nice community or a smart community or like a funny community or, you know, creative, whatever it might be, because that kind of leads to a different, I guess, set of people. And then the people trying to fit in are also going to respond to what they're going to get respect for.
That's a really good point. That's something that I haven't thought through so much, but I do see that. And I even see a different culture in the Superhuman group versus like the developer questions channel in the Discord, you know? And I think it is actually like, culturally, we enjoy having fun and being funny in the Superhumans, like probably as the first goal. But there's plenty of like serious and important things that happen, right? But like generally keeping it fun is quite important versus like keeping it accurate in the developer questions channel, right? Is the definitely like the thing that gets you the most esteem. And being funny and posting GIFs there probably is like a little bit annoying or a distraction, right? So yeah, that's a really important point. Yeah. What were you going to say, Nick?
I'm curious how the tipping bot has that like changed the culture at all in the Discord. I've seen good results with that in other Discords.
Yeah, I'm open to hearing what the good results you've seen are. Like if there's additional strategies. I have stopped. In fact, I just wrote yesterday. It's kind of corny, but I said like I'm no longer tipping people directly for efforts because all your efforts to me are priceless, and I don't want to put a price on them. Now, of course, you know, and the KPI options is a more diffuse way, but like, I don't want to be paying people some amount of UMA directly for some task or some meme or some tweet, you know? So what I use it for personally is I'll do like the airdrops, or I'll sort of like give people unexpected things that aren't task related, but the community is using it with each other and they pay each other for things as acknowledgements. And I think that's really cool because that is a sign of, you know, honor and respect and esteem that's not necessarily limited to the financial piece of it, as opposed to coming from like the person holding the company funds, right? So I think it's been cool. That said, I'm sure there's other ways to maximize it that I just haven't explored. Like I'd be curious even to hear other people's how have you seen it used well, Nick?
So I only speak from one Discord. I found so Perpetual Protocol has a good culture of tipping where they have several admins who have tipping power, and anyone who responds to anyone else's question in the Discord, well, like the admin will just tip them. So now there's this sort of expectation within the community that if you help out each other, you'll get tipped. Mm-hmm. And I find that their Discord's pretty good at that.
And
yeah.
And do you see any perverse effects from that at all?
Well, I guess like you can't like fake. There's no easy way to game it. I guess you could answer a question and then delete your message after.
Right.
You could ask a question from a fake account and then answer it.
That's actually true. Yeah, you could do that, but that's helpful to someone because you're asking like a genuine question. It's you're writing an FAQ.
Fair.
True. That's funny. Yeah, that's cool, and that's good to know. I mean, that's not too far away from what we do with like the dev support group. It's just not like on a piecemeal way. It's more like a role versus a gig job. Yeah, that's cool. That might be worth exploring. Cool. Awesome. Well, guys, I don't feel any need to stretch this out to an hour just because we're here. I'm happy to make this a shorter call. Unless anyone has anything else, I think we could just call it. And I will go.
This was great. Thank you, Clayton.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Clayton.
Thanks, Clayton.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. It's really, really great, Clayton. Thank you.